What's up, guys? Alec Baldwin has been charged with involuntary manslaughter, a fourth-degree felony. We're going to break it down in this video. To give you a little background, I'm Colton Richardson. I am a former prosecutor, so I handled criminal charges anywhere from DUI to manslaughter like this. And so we'll break it down in this video. I was in Oklahoma, so the law is a little bit different in New Mexico, but let's take a look. All right, so this is the New Mexico statutes for manslaughter in here. So manslaughter is the unlawful killing of a human being without malice. Malice is some kind of thinking about it before, and depraved heart is sometimes what they say. Voluntary manslaughter consists of manslaughter committed upon a sudden quarrel or in the heat of passion. So that's when they're, like they say, heat of passion. That could be in an argument, is mostly someone can be really angry. That's for the most part when voluntary manslaughter is occurred. But in this case, Alec Baldwin's charged with involuntary manslaughter. And so involuntary manslaughter consists of manslaughter committed in the commission of an unlawful act not amounting to felony or in the commission of a lawful act which might produce death in an unlawful manner or without due caution and circumspection. So that's what he's been charged with in this case. I believe in New Mexico, it's the lowest charge for murder or manslaughter for killing someone. In the decision to charge, the prosecutors had a whole bunch of options. They could have even charged with something like assault and battery. That'd still be difficult to get there, only because in that case you have to prove intent. In this, we'll get to this, but in this situation, you don't necessarily have to prove intent, which is really intent to kill or intent to harm someone. So this definition is pretty important in the prosecution. Usually they'll break them down to elements. For example, in Oklahoma, the elements for manslaughter, here we go, second degree. So in Oklahoma, it looks something like this. And the state would have to meet these elements. First, the death of a human. Obviously, there's a death of a human. Second, the death was unlawful, so it wasn't a legal killing. Third, the death was caused by culpable negligence of the defendant or defendants. And so that's where they're getting at in this situation. So in Oklahoma, it'd be manslaughter in the second degree is the same as New Mexico's involuntary manslaughter. It has to do with negligence. Most crimes do not deal with negligence. Negligence is usually a tort and civil action, which there have been civil cases filed in this. But the prosecutors in this case, in Alec Baldwin's case, decided, this doesn't amount to intent. And so really they looked at all the evidence and thought, okay, at most it is just negligence. And so that's what they charged him with, without due caution or circumspection. And with that, he could have looked in the gun. He could have had Hannah Gutierrez Reed say, Hannah, come here. Show me that there's no ammo in this. I want to be safe. I want to see exactly what you did and make sure you're doing it right, because I'm going to pull this trigger and I don't want there to be any bullets in there. But he didn't do that. So both he has been charged. Let's look at this. Alec Baldwin will be charged in New Mexico by prosecutors for the 2021 shooting. One of the counts is for involuntary manslaughter, in which prosecutors will have to prove there is an underlying negligence. As we just went through, the charge is a fourth-degree felony and carries a sentence of up to 18 months in jail and a $5,000 fine. Second charge is involuntary manslaughter in the commission of a lawful act, which requires proof that there is more than a simple negligence involved in the death. This charge includes a firearm enhancement, which adds a mandatory penalty of 5 years in jail. Now, this is all important. So the first charge is involuntary manslaughter. The second charge is involuntary manslaughter in commission of a lawful act. So he was lawfully on the scene of rust. He was lawfully participating in the practice of the shoot for rust. He lawfully, in his mind, pulled the trigger, but he didn't check to see whether there was ammo in it, live ammo. And so what they're saying is this involuntary manslaughter in the commission of a lawful act requires proof that there was more than simple negligence involved in the death. So there has to be something more than negligence. And negligence is just what a normal and prudent person would do. Reasonable person. What would a reasonable person do in this situation? If they don't do that, then they're negligent. So in most situations, I would say it's normal. A person who understands basic gun safety should look in the gun upon receipt of it, should not point it at anyone, should check it, see if it's loaded, especially before pulling the trigger. He did none of these things, which could be seen as more than simple negligence. But the thing is that this crime has a firearm enhancement. That means if there is a firearm used in the commission of it, then it adds a mandatory penalty of 5 years in jail. And so Alec Baldwin could be facing 5 years in jail. So we'll continue. Rust Assistant Director David Hall signed a plea deal for the charge of a negligent use of a deadly weapon, resulting in a suspended sentence and 6 months of probation. So David Hall's signed a plea deal. I'm surprised, honestly, that it is a suspended sentence. So that will be on his record for the rest of his life, more than likely. I don't know New Mexico's expungement laws. But so there's a few different types of options as a prosecutor. You can do a deferred sentence, which means you go on probation, you plead guilty, go on probation, and the judge withholds a finding of guilt, which means we're going to wait until the end of your probation to see how probation goes and if you violate the rules and terms of your probation. The next option is a suspended sentence. In a suspended sentence, the judge finds guilt at the time of your plea, and it goes straight to your record. In deferred sentence, it has the chance to stay off your record. Suspended, it is on your record. So he's charged with negligent use of a deadly weapon. It's probably a misdemeanor since he only got 6 months of probation. So he might be able to expunge this sooner rather than later. You can expunge misdemeanors sooner rather than felonies in most situations. But it's interesting that he already signed a plea deal and they just came out with Alec Baldwin's charges. So they must have had something in the works already to where David Halls is actually going to testify against Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. The other thing is Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is charged with these 2 counts of involuntary manslaughter as well. And honestly, going through all of the evidence, I think she's more culpable than Alec Baldwin. And I will tell you what I think at the end on what's going to happen. But if any one of these 3 people, Alec Baldwin, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, or David Halls, had done their job, Helena Hutchins would be alive today. It's that simple. The evidence clearly shows a pattern of criminal disregard for safety on the Rust film set. Again, this article talks about in the months later after the shooting, in December 2021, Baldwin said he did not pull the trigger in an ABC interview. An FBI forensic report obtained in ABC News uncovered that despite Baldwin's denial, the gun could not have gone off without the pull of a trigger. I think that really hurts Alec Baldwin because if he testifies for himself, and regardless if he does, the state can bring in evidence of the interview because into a trial, usually you can't bring statements, out-of-court statements, in a trial if they're offered for the truth of the matter. So that's hearsay. Hearsay, two parts, is an out-of-court statement offered for the truth of the matter. So usually those are not admissible, but there are lots of exceptions. And one of them is if it is against a party opponent. In this case, it would be against Alec Baldwin. So they can bring in the fact that Alec Baldwin said he did not pull the trigger, but in an FBI forensic report, it was not possible for him not to have pulled the trigger. So again, that was a mistake on Alec Baldwin's part to do a recorded interview with ABC News, especially so close in time. If I were in his situation, I probably would have waited until after a criminal suit, if there was going to be one brought, or a civil suit, because any of that could be used against him. And that's what I would have done, and that's what I would advise my client to do. But I'm not Alec Baldwin, and I'm not his lawyer. So let's look into what involuntary manslaughter is a little bit more. This is some case law from New Mexico, which has been... So the difference between statutory law and case law is statutory law is codified by the legislative, and case law is made by the courts. So legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch enforces them, and the judicial branch interprets them. So what we're looking at is case law now, in which the judicial branch is interpreting what the legislative branch means. So in general, involuntary manslaughter statute excludes all cases of intentional killing and includes only unintentional killings by acts of unlawful but not felonious, or lawful but done in an unlawful manner, or without due caution and circumspection. Killing must be unintentional to constitute involuntary manslaughter, and if it is intentional and not justifiable, it belongs in some one of the classes of unlawful homicide of a higher degree than involuntary manslaughter. And these are just the citations to the cases. That kind of breaks it down. So pretty much if it's intentional killing, then it's anything but involuntary manslaughter. It's much worse and higher punishment. Again, involuntary manslaughter was confined to cases where the killing was unintentional. So what the state believes is possibly that Alec Baldwin did this unintentionally, negligently. Involuntary manslaughter may be committed by both unlawful and lawful ways. And then they break down what the difference is. The statute applies the language defined by the courts to mean criminal negligence only to lawful act portion of the statute. So here's where a really important part of it is right here. Criminal negligence required for involuntary manslaughter by lawful act. A killing by lawful act to be involuntary manslaughter depends on whether the lawful act was done in an unlawful manner or without due caution and circumspection. So that's what we read earlier in the definition of what involuntary manslaughter is. The phrase without due caution and circumspection has been held to involve the concept of criminal negligence, which concept includes conduct which is reckless, wanton, or willful. Obviously, this wasn't necessarily willful, it seems like, is their position, the prosecutors, and so they're going to go for more reckless and wanton because reckless because he didn't check the weapon, he didn't ask Hannah to check it in front of him, anything like that. So there's this article, Alec Baldwin's lawyer calls Russ shooting criminal charges terrible miscarriage of justice. It's interesting how they say that, but I can understand the tough position that the prosecutors were in deciding to bring charges, because obviously this is a terrible thing that happened. And even Helena's surviving husband has said this is an accident, and a terrible accident at that. So he goes on, the decision distorts Helena Hutchins' tragic death and represents a terrible miscarriage of justice. Mr. Baldwin had no reason to believe there was a live bullet in the gun or anywhere on the movie set. He relied on the professionals with whom he worked, who assured him the gun did not have live rounds. We will fight these charges and we will win. So they're saying they will fight him, that he's not going to take a plea, which is very interesting. So there might be a trial, which would be very interesting. I hope they stream it because I would love to watch it, see everything that's going on, all the testimony. But it looks like they're going to fight it and leave it up to a jury to decide whether or not this is involuntary manslaughter. And they have to prove, now the state does have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. But he didn't do any of the things he was supposed to do to make sure the people around him were safe. They didn't exercise due caution, lack of care on the set. No, that is true. An actor doesn't get a free pass just because they're an actor, the prosecutor went on to say, stating that there will be no attempt to arrest Baldwin. The DA also told the cable newser that Baldwin's camp knew the charges were coming. So they're not going to arrest him, do a walkthrough and everything. They already knew the charges were coming, so they already took care of all that. Hannah is also charged. Hannah is and has always been very emotional and sad about this tragic accident. Oh, this is Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's lawyer saying this. I was about to say, is this the prosecutor saying this? But she did not commit involuntary manslaughter. So now they're saying that she didn't commit involuntary manslaughter. These charges are the result of a very flawed investigation. I'd like to know how they believe it's flawed, and an inaccurate understanding of the full facts. We intend to bring the full truth to light and believe Hannah will be exonerated of wrongdoing by a jury. So I'm interested. It sounds like they're both going to go to trial and that the state's not going to offer them any plea deal, which would be very interesting because then Alec Baldwin does have a risk of spending at least 5 years in prison. That's the minimum on the enhancement. So, and it looks like Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is going to take it to a jury as well. And so I'm interested to see if they're going to try the cases together, because then it'll be Alec Baldwin's attorneys pointing the finger at Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. I wonder if Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is going to point the finger back at Baldwin or if she's going to point it back at anyone else. In response to the announcement by the prosecutor, the attorney for Hutchins' family, we want to thank the Santa Fe Sheriff and District Attorney for concluding their thorough investigation and determining that charges for involuntary manslaughter are warranted for the killing of Helena Hutchins with conscious disregard for human life. Our independent investigation also supports charges are warranted. It is a comfort to the family that in New Mexico, no one is above the law. We support the charges, will fully cooperate with this prosecution, and fervently hope that the justice system works to protect the public and hold accountable those who break the law. So it's really interesting to see that there might be a trial with Hannah Gutierrez-Reed and Alec Baldwin, and that is probably why they got David Hall to plea so quickly to a 6-month suspended on probation so that he can testify against them. And if he does testify against Alec Baldwin and Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the state will have to discuss what kind of deal happened, because if they don't, then Alec Baldwin's attorney or Hannah Gutierrez-Reed's will definitely talk about what the deal was that he got in order to testify against them. Now, what do I think? Before reading all this, I honestly thought that the state would offer a deferred sentence to Alec Baldwin. And like I discussed earlier, that means it does not go on his record. He can get it expunged if he abides by the terms of the probation and go down the merry way. I mean, what's the purpose of criminal law? So in law school, you talk a lot about theory. And so what's the purpose of it? There's really two purposes. One is to punish the wrongdoer. And the second reason is a little circumventing, but it's to deter others from doing the same thing. And so, honestly, I do not think that this is going to happen again. I do not think Alec Baldwin's going to maybe not even star in another movie with a gun. But I think he's going to always check the gun after this. I don't think he's going to go out and kill anyone else. And so I don't think it's a huge risk. But then you bring in no one's above the law, and those arguments. I mean, no one is above the law, and that's why he would still plead to something. I didn't think they would offer suspended, but right now, I at this point I do not think they will offer suspended actually, because they offered David Hall as suspended, and if they were going to offer Alec Baldwin is suspended, then they probably would have given David Hall a deferred or something like that. But they offered David Hall a suspended. And so that leads me to believe that the New Mexico prosecutors they want to take Alec Baldwin to trial. Is what it seems like. So we'll see what exactly happens with that. At this point, reading through everything, I don't think that the prosecutors are going to offer a plea deal to Alec Baldwin. I don't think they'll offer one to Hannah Gutierrez-Reed either, based on what's going on. I've read a large portion of the investigative report completed by the investigators, and I think Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is also, I believe she's probably more culpable than Alec Baldwin, because I do think Alec Baldwin was relying on Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, the professionals, to a certain extent, but that's where they might have to admit evidence of the customs and norms on the set, what exactly goes on, and all of that kind of sorts of evidence to help build Alec Baldwin's case that he relied on Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. So at this point, I do think Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is more culpable, but based on everything I read, I don't think that the prosecutors are going to offer any plea deal at the moment unless it's in time, and I do not think that Alec Baldwin or Hannah Gutierrez-Reed is going to plead to in time in prison. So let me know what you guys think is going to happen, or what you guys want to see going to happen. We'll have to keep following up on this case and watch these old videos to see the process of how we got here. See you next time.